first block or the first line. So it happens that Safari, the web browser by Apple, generally supports this add event listener interface to register event handlers, except for this event called double click. So the double click event, you have to register using this on double click attribute. And this is something you figure out once and put it in your library, and then it's done. So, and if these last three are not yet a good reason to have this library function, then the first one is so. And so to have to deal with all this browser idiosyncratic weirdness really forces you to just write good abstractions and put them in libraries. So,
but it's a hard problem when the next version is coming out.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah.
You have to look through all your library.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that's actually a good occasion to go through your library, clean up the code, refactor it again. So, yeah, so you see, I'm arguing that this weirdness and crap is actually good for you and your software. So,
it's good for you.
Yet, some things in practice are still challenging, however, so in Ajax-based web applications. So I'm just going to mention there. So one big thing is deployment. So big applications consist of very many files, and you can't afford to load all different JavaScript files in an HTML page. So what you have to do in order to deploy your application, you have to somehow roll all these files into one, for instance, and on the way just remove comments and rename identifiers to shorter names in order to save bandwidth, and so on. So, and you have to come up with a versioning scheme that, or with a modularization scheme that allows you to exploit browser caching most effectively. So you want to somehow modularize your library into several modules such that if you make an update to your library in your release schedule and release that, then the browser doesn't have to refetch all the compiled code but can still exploit caching for the compiled JavaScript code. And for all these kinds of things, there are only best practices around now, but not yet tools or something. So just JavaScript deployment is still handwork, and JavaScript compilation, obfuscation, so just preparation for deployment is just handwork, and you write tools manually still. So that's a big thing for development. Another thing is bookmarking and history of these applications. The thing is, of course, if you have a page and you interact with the page and the page accumulates state, then this state is not represented in the URL of this page, of course. So, and also if you do something and the page doesn't reload, then the previous state of the page is not recorded in the browser history. So you can't just go back using the browser history. Yet, bookmarking and browser history are very important interaction patterns with web applications. So you have to go to extra length in order to implement this. And for instance, in Google Maps, we do both. One is very explicitly, so you have on every page, or on the Google Maps page, you have a link to this page. And this link to this page always contains a URL that represents the current state of the page, although the URL itself doesn't change if you do something like do a new search or pan the map or whatever. So, and also whenever you do a search, a new entry is created in the history through, well, one of the common tricks that are applied to it. So, and that is one area that needs to be developed further. So, and new browsers or modern browsers also have more support for explicit interaction of web applications with both the bookmark set and the history. And the last thing is frameworks. So there are now Ajax frameworks popping up. So, and the big thing, or the important thing is actually to resist the temptation to use a framework or to build a framework even, because there already is one. That framework is called browser. So, and if you think of it, the browser does for web applications exactly what normally a framework does for graphical user interface-based applications. So it basically initializes the main loop, allows you to register event handlers, generates the events, schedules the event handlers for execution, provides tools in which, or vocabulary in which to implement or describe the actions that the event handler execute, and so on. So basically, the browser is already the framework for your application, so because it just does everything of that. And it is quite tedious to deal with yet another layer around all that. So, and it's of course important to have tools or lightweight libraries, like the event handler library function that I demonstrated, but it is mostly a step in the wrong direction to develop a framework for Ajax applications. So, and yet they are popping up, and that is going to create some hassle, probably.
Are there some ready-to-use libraries with the common stuff?
Oh yes, Google for Ajax. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So,
good and better ones? Are there good and worse ones?
I don't know. So I write most of the stuff I need myself, and yeah. Of course, I mean, you don't want to do that infinitely. So for instance, more complex interaction widgets, you don't want to write yourself again. So like pull-down menus and tree widgets and all that stuff. But still, a thing to look at is, if you look at such a widget implementation, and you can use a widget standalone. That is, you can use a tree widget, for instance. Just put it in your page and have a tree widget on your page, and don't have to initialize your whole page in some framework or something, then that's a good sign. So, and that's what you are looking for. So you look for very well separated collections of things, widgets, functions, whatever, instead of a homogeneous monolithic framework. Okay, to conclude with, I just want to mention some of the other buzzwords that are around. Mobile code was very fashionable in the 90s or so, and I think that JavaScript or these web applications has come as close to mobile code as we could have hoped for 10 years ago or so. Another thing is application state migration. So I recently heard a talk of Jim Geddes, who is the inventor of, or one of the co-inventors of the X Windows system. And he complained, or he said that one of the biggest design mistake or architecture mistakes of the X11 system is that there's on every X server only one user. So you have this one mouse, one keyboard, one display thing. And application state migration doesn't work at all. So if you are at the server, then you are bound to the server, and you can't just take your application with you moving to another display or something. So neither can two users in one display, nor can one user use two displays transparently. So in this application state migration, if you think of it flexibly enough, then this URL-based representation of interaction state does exactly that. So you basically can take your application state with you, mail it to somebody else in an email, put it in a bookmark or put it in a file and retrieve it later, and so on. So that's also as close as it gets currently to taking the interaction state of an interactive application with you to another display. So it's very rudimentary, but it is very interesting to notice that this actually does something that other and much older technologies fail to do. Software as a service also buzzword that is recently around. And a very interesting thing is client-side application integration. And another thing I'm going to talk about tomorrow is the fact that the Google Maps service has an API that basically allows you to embed a map in any HTML page. So that is, whenever you talk in a page about a place, you can just put a map of this place in this page. And it still uses the Google map, but in a page that comes from entirely somewhere else. And the interesting thing is to think this idea further, and to think that there are services published in the web that you can just put together in web pages, and on the client side, not on the server side. That's the big thing here. You can use these services just by referencing them in the text that is sent to the client side. And the integration and this orchestration of the collaboration, again, happens only on the client side. And that's a very nice perspective if you manage to look at it under this regard. Yeah, so much for this. Thank you very much for your patience. And